Now to this. Right now, Democrats are facing a growing list of trouble. We know. They're divided over how to counter President Trump. They don't have a unifying leader or a unifying message, and the party's favorability with voters is at an all-time low. Despite those challenges, and there may be more that we missed, in fact, we're not in their inner circle right now. I understand it can get pretty chippy there. Anyway, all of that is facing them. Right? This is very, very important this very minute. Democrats still seem to be in post-mortem mode over November.
I think what we allowed ourselves to do is we got timid. And then when we got power, we didn't pass things that improved people's lives. This whole idea, I think the Democratic Party gets theoretical.
I think we were guilty of not thinking big and not acting big.
The biggest mistake is not centering people enough. A lot of people voted for Donald Trump because they trusted him and didn't trust that Democrats could deliver for them.
The Atlantic has this headline: Democrats have a problem. They can't stop talking about their problems. An excerpt here: since their election wipeout, Democrats have been engaged in and subjected to a free-for-all of problem naming. Yes, Democrats do have many problems, but a good election can solve many of them. Campaigns should be about the future, as Bill Clinton used to say, and Democrats should get on with theirs. Power panel now. Matt Gorman, Vice President of Targeted Victory, and Fred Hicks, founder and president of Hicks Evaluation Group. Great to see you both. Fred, I'm going to start with you with just how do you get the party to stop navel-gazing?
Well, I think as we look at Donald Trump's failures mounting and with the stock market and with the challenges we just talked about to his 176 or so executive orders, when most presidents have only signed 220 over their entire 4-year term, it's right for Democrats to look at this because we have to get our act together so that we can build on the success of the elections last week and really help America get back on track. And so I fully support this because 26 is in a very important year, and we need to build on what the American people are saying that they really want to see, which is balance, fairness, and a focus on their issues.
A rebuttal from you, Matt?
Yeah, look, I see Democrats are obsessed with tactics, right? Let's start a podcast, as Andy Bashir did today, on top of what Gavin Newsom already did. Let's start swearing every time we talk to people, as you saw Tim Walz often does on the stump or in tweets, you know. And Cory Booker, the filibuster, you know, that was the perfect encapsulation of what Democrats are facing. We're going to start a movement, but I'm going to do it from the well of the Senate and talk for 24 hours about really no one knows exactly what. Look, they're obsessed with tactics and not changing a strategy. There's a reason they're at 29% approval ratings. It's because their policies are unpopular, not a change in tactics.
You know, it was interesting, and having you say what Cory Booker, he's the senator in my state of New Jersey, was talking about, he was using his words instead of actions. And Fred, it kind of gets back to what you were saying, that it's time to come up with ways. If you don't like what President Trump is doing, then say what you would do. But that's not what we're seeing. The Hill is pointing out that a growing number of Democratic incumbents are facing primary challenges from younger progressives, underscoring generational and ideological rifts within the party. At least 3 long-serving members of the House, including former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, have already drawn younger primary opponents who are calling out the need for a change.
People are really ready for massive change. Politics is broken. They know that the Chuck Schumers and the Nancy Pelosi's and the Hakeem Jeffries and the Donald Trumps has got to just go.
If you want to know why we as Democrats are so bad at fighting back against Trump, look at guys like my former boss. Brad Sherman has been in Washington for nearly 30 years.
We need new leaders because the same people in D.C. who got us into this mess are not going to be the ones to get us out of it.
So is AOC your party now, Fred?
Listen, I fully support, like I said, a full review of what's happening. And I do think that we probably need to have some change. Listen, we saw. No, it's not, because, listen, we saw over 5 million people participate in protests this weekend. People are angry, people are frustrated, and people are afraid, and they're losing thousands of dollars in their retirement accounts. And so if our leadership is not going to respond, then we need to raise up new people. But hopefully, this conversation will spur a little bit more action. And as Matt talked about, this will help us come together and develop our strategy as we move forward, because Donald Trump is leaving a cavernous opening for us, and we need to be able to take advantage of that. So I agree with Matt.
Even with that opening that you're talking about, Matt, I'm sure you saw these statistics over the last week and a half or so. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from New York, the reason I chose her is because she's the only one in a group of potential Democrats for 2028 that even gets into the double digits. The lowest one, she's at 10%. Your take?
No, and Saikat Chakrabarti, the person who's challenging Pelosi, was her former chief of staff when AOC first came in the House. So again, her tentacles are spreading with other staff running. But look, what's happening in the Democratic Party reminds me of what happened a little bit in the Republican Party. You know, with the Tea Party coming in, we had a lot of our old guard challenged by new folks. You had Democrats now unafraid to challenge leadership, as you see now Chuck Schumer coming under a lot of scrutiny. They're having to remake their party, and I think one of the biggest things they need to do first is reckon with the legacy of Joe Biden. We had to do it with George W. Bush. You know, all these non-answers you saw on those same shows over the weekend about what they knew when Joe Biden was kind of losing a step and when did they know it. They haven't had an answer for that, and they need to come to grips with that if they're going to move forward as well.
Well, look, I can see the coverage that they're trying to give themselves, Matt and Fred, but literally everybody could see what was going on with Biden. We couldn't see it from the inside out, and it wasn't our responsibility as journalists to do more than the facts would give us, and it would have to come from them. But certainly falling off your bike that's not moving. I mean, all the things, the tripping over the sandbag at the Naval Academy event. I mean, it was just boom, 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 staccato. People could see it. So it almost feels like a cover-up if they don't now say why they didn't see it or how they missed it. Fred.
Well, Harris, I just remind people that a year ago, 66% of Americans said they did not want to see Donald Trump or Joe Biden on the ballot. Now,
we remember. Anybody but Biden on your side. I remember.
Well, 66% said they didn't want to see either one of them, right? That was going into the primary season. And as Matt talked about, and I'm glad he acknowledged that back in 2010 and 2012, the Republican Party went through the same thing with the Tea Party. And remind you that Eric Cantor, the leader in the House at the time, lost his primary because Republicans were not happy with the direction of the party. So this is something that parties do after a loss. And the Republican Party rebounded.
All of that
I think we'll do the same.
Yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
Look, I mean, no, look, any of that Biden story was not a surprise if you're paying attention, to your point, Harris, right? 3 weeks before that infamous June debate, the Wall Street Journal wrote a story outlining much of what we saw on that stage. And Democrats, including people who pushed Biden aside later, like Nancy Pelosi, acted as if that was written in crayon and attacked it relentlessly. And so I think they need to come to grips with that first before they do anything else. And look, these parties go through this stuff. But we'll see. We'll see.
Okay. So, Fred, just to acknowledge what you said, though, Republicans were dealing with what wasn't working for them. I don't know why Democrats couldn't stand up against Joe Biden and say it wasn't working for them. But get this. There is a storm of books that are doing it for them. And it's raising a lot of questions about accountability from those accused of perpetrating a cover-up. 2 books released this month reveal more about Joe Biden's declining mental fitness and his aborted presidential campaign. We learned former President Obama was working against Vice President Kamala Harris because he didn't believe she could win, and that Harris had to beg Biden to endorse her. Ouch. Former White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain also called Biden, quote, fatigued, befuddled, and disengaged, end quote, before his disastrous debate last June with Trump. Senator Adam Schiff dodged a question about whether Joe Biden's team lied to people about the president's mental capacities.
It's hard for me to gauge what the closest advisors of the president were seeing at the time. I can only speak to the interactions that I had with him, which were, in the months leading up to his getting out of the race, largely ceremonial occasions. But I will say this. He made the decision to get out of the race. I think that was the right decision.
He could have just answered the question, Matt.
No, I mean, that was damning, right? And it's okay. Now it all can come out. People can be honest, right? Because it's all in the past, right? They can say he was befuddled, and all these stories that I know we're going to learn about are going to be extremely damning. But a year ago, you couldn't say that. It was a lie. It was anathema, but now it's safe. And I think this is such a scandal and an indictment on the mainstream media and on Democrats who held this for so long. And they did this to themselves. They have no one to blame but themselves. And I think that's the key.
Fred, last word.
Yeah. And so I don't disagree with that, but Republicans in Congress are doing the same thing right now with Donald Trump. And so I challenge Republicans to take their own advice.
Wow. Okay. We'll bring you back when you can expound on that, perhaps. Gentlemen, thank you. The nation's heartland.
Thank you.